Hello and welcome to the Southwest Drought Briefing. My name is Emily Elias and I'm the director of the USDA Southwest Climate Hub. And this briefing is a collaboration with Joel Lisenby with the National Integrated Drought Information Systems and the Drought Monitoring and Reporting Group of the Drought Learning Network. Today, Joel will be helping to field the questions that you may have during the presentation. If you have questions at any time, please use the questions feature in the GoToWebinar. And please enter those questions at any time. We'll get to as many of those as possible. We begin this meeting today by acknowledging that the land each of us is joining from is the ancestral lands of Indigenous cultures. As we're all in different parts of the region, this may be different for all of us. I'm speaking from the ancestral lands and territories of the Nuchu or Ute, Apache, the Pueblos, Hopi, Zuni, and the Dene Nation. I believe it's important to provide this acknowledgement because the narratives of this land and region have long been told from one dominant perspective without the full acknowledgement of the people who lived on this land before us. This is important because we're land managers, or we work in support of land managers, and we strive to manage land well for future generations and for the good of all. Thank you for your attention and respect in acknowledging our history. Today, we're very lucky to hear from Dr. Nancy Sellover. She is the Arizona State Climatologist, and she'll be providing us with the current conditions and outlook. We will continue these half-an-hour drought briefings every month as long as conditions persist in the exceptional and extreme categories. After we hear from Nancy, then we'll hear from Dr. Danelle Peck. Danelle is the director of the USDA Northern Plains Climate Hub and the leader of GrassCast, which is a grassland productivity forecast. And she'll be talking about that forecast for the Southwest today, but that productivity forecast does cover the Northern Plains and the Central Plains as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Nancy for our current conditions and outlook.
Okay, thank you. So let's move to the first slide. Advance the slides. Hello. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to start with a little discussion of the Colorado upper and lower. So this is where we started the water year. We were extremely dry across the entire thing. After the dry period we had basically starting in late March, early April of last year. And then we got to the first early part of the winter season, and it was really continued to still dry in Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, parts of Utah. A little bit of precipitation up in the upper Colorado, and through November into December, we again had a little bit of precipitation in the upper Colorado, pretty much nothing in the lower Colorado. Till finally, late December, early January, we started getting some precipitation down in the lower basin. But it wasn't even in the higher elevation parts for the most part. It was really over in western Arizona. And then it was drier up in the upper basin. February, we flipped over the other way into more precipitation in the upper basin. And less, and again, dropping to almost nothing in the lower basin. And then through March, similar situation. We had some in the upper basin, very little in the lower basin. So it's been a really dry water year so far for a lot of the parts of the Colorado basin. When we look at the entire Southwest, precipitation through the water year from September through March, we have been below 50% for most of Arizona, southern Nevada, southern California, and then less than 70% for much of the rest of the region. Eastern Colorado fared much better than the rest of us, but Utah's had a pretty bad time of it in terms of precipitation. When we look at temperature, southern Arizona has been quite warm. Most of New Mexico and eastern Colorado have been near normal in terms of temperature. Even Utah was near normal in terms of temperature, but they just weren't getting the precipitation and the snow that they normally get at this time of year. So when we look at the Drought Monitor, the extreme and exceptional drought. We started the water year pretty much at about 50%, a little over 50% of the Southwest was in exceptional or extreme drought. It got worse as we started. The early winter was quite dry, particularly Utah, which normally gets quite a bit of snow. Even in a La Nina, it's not as affected as we would expect Arizona and New Mexico to be. Western Colorado also extremely dry, so we jumped up to 67.5%. Then through December into January, again, we continued the dry trend and not have a lot of storms that were dropping much precipitation, not a lot of snow. We jumped up to 72.5%. The end of January, early February, a few storms hit Colorado primarily, but pretty much Utah still was getting nothing. Nevada was extremely dry, and that continued on into March. And then finally we got into April at the beginning of this week, but we were still at almost 65% in extreme or exceptional drought. Eastern half of Colorado is faring a little bit better than the rest, but they are still quite dry relative to what they would normally be at this time of year. So we look at reservoir levels for Utah over on the left side, and we are sitting in the 37.5 to 75% for a lot of the reservoirs. There's a couple that are a little bit fuller, but quite frankly, they're really relatively low for what they should be this time of year. Look at the upper Colorado basin. Flaming Gorge is doing pretty good. Fontanelle is very, very low. Blue Mesa is less than half full. We come down to Navajo, that's only 62% full. And then it drops down into Lake Powell, which is very low at this point in time. When we jump to Arizona, we see again Lake Powell at 36%. Lake Mead gets a little bit of equalizing flow that flows over from Powell into Mead, but it's still only at 40%. Central Arizona, the salt system is doing pretty well because we had a really good winter previous year. Even though we had a dry summer, most of our filling of the reservoir depends on that winter snowpack, and the previous 2 winters were quite wet, so we're still in good shape there. And of course, the lower Colorado basin is all managed flows, and so those remain quite full, so they can provide irrigation water. We look over to New Mexico. We see Elephant Butte is extremely low at 10%, and most of the state is doing very, very poorly. I think Ute Reservoir over in far eastern New Mexico at 68% is the most full. Conchiti's got 85%, but it's such a tiny little reservoir. It's not a good indicator of how well they're doing because the rest of them are quite low. When we look at Lake Powell, because a lot of us depend on Colorado River water, we see the inflows to the Colorado have just been going down. We're sending more out into Lake Mead to keep its level up than we are able to fill. So we've dropped quite a bit over all of the previous 5 years in Powell. And then we move over to Mead, and we are relatively low. 2016 was a little bit worse at this point in time, but one of the problems at this point is that the BLM, Bureau of Land Management, has already put out their first issue of their 24-month study, and they're currently predicting that we will be below 1075 by January 1st, 2022. That circle tells you the level. That's only indicating by September, but by January, when it matters, we will I'm sure we will be below that level, and that's going to trigger a tier 1 shortage. Unless we have a really snowy period from October 1st until the end of December, we're definitely going to be below that. And even if we do that, it isn't going to get into the reservoir system by then anyway. It would come in the following year. So we're pretty much assured that we're going to be at a shortage. We look at the long-term blends. You can see the West is the place in the country that's suffering the most, largely Arizona and southern Nevada, but southern Utah and western Colorado, eastern New Mexico are all in very bad shape, as is southwest Texas. We look at the eddy, and again, evaporation. We're losing a lot of the moisture that we've had. Southern California and Nevada, Southern Arizona, and Southern New Mexico are all in pretty bad shape, and we're still having dry conditions happening in the Four Corners region. Further north, they got some benefit from precipitation, certainly parts of Wyoming. We look at the stream flow, and again, same sort of picture. Nevada is an extremely dry situation, as is most of the higher elevation parts of Arizona, western New Mexico, western Colorado, and eastern Utah. So in terms of impacts, we had low soil moisture prior to the snow accumulation. There wasn't a lot of snow accumulation and the soils were dry, so that's all reducing the spring runoff. We had early snowmelt. We had some cold conditions on parts of the Southwest this winter, but it didn't hang around long enough, and so we had early snowmelt, and that's reducing our stream flow. So ranchers have been culling their cattle herds because there hasn't been a lot of rangeland forage. The stock ponds are drying up, the catchments are drying up. There's been water hauling trying to relieve that situation, but it certainly isn't enough. And the biggest issue, I think, this whole season so far is going to be the wildfire danger. It was reduced a bit over the winter from some of the snow, which is typical, but it wasn't reduced as much as it normally is because we didn't have as much precipitation as usual. And so we've had a real windy spring, but we also even had a real windy situation in late winter. And so that those winds have further dried out the vegetation, and that's increasing the wildfire danger. When we look at the total U.S. wildfire acres from 83 on, you'll see we're in an increasing situation. And this is pretty much all of the last half of this is pretty much the drought, certainly for us in Arizona and most of the Southwest. And so you can see 2020 was extreme number of acres were burned, and we all remember a lot of those fires. When we look at where we are at this point, there's 2 fires in Arizona. One of them is almost contained. There's one in western New Mexico. The ones in Colorado are prescribed burns, and I hope they are maintaining good control on that, because with the windy conditions, you don't want to get those out of control, which can happen very quickly. And then the northern Colorado, those were the burn areas from last year's fire, which were significant, and we hope we don't see a repeat of that. We're not anticipating that we're going to be in any good condition in terms of our wildfire situation in Arizona. It's extremely dry, the soil's dry, the vegetation's all dried out, and the winds are high. So we're looking at significant fire danger here. When we look at the CPC outlooks, the temperature 3 months from May to July, which is typical, it's warmer than normal. This is normally a dry and warm period for us in the Southwest, and that's certainly going to be the case this time. They're anticipating even warmer conditions, which is just going to exacerbate the dry grassland and the soil evaporation and dry soil and the fire danger. And over here on the right is the precipitation outlook. At least we're looking at equal chances in Arizona and much of New Mexico, Southern California and Nevada, but this is a dry period anyway, so the reality is we're not expecting much precipitation. Colorado, Utah, and eastern New Mexico probably going to be a little bit below average for their precipitation, and certainly that's not going to help the fire situation. When we go further and look at the summer, anticipating warmer than normal summer conditions across the entire Southwest and actually across most of the country. And when we look at precipitation, there's a small possibility that we could be having a little wetter than normal monsoon in Arizona and western New Mexico. That's partly because when we have a situation where the snowpack melts out early, we sometimes end up with an early onset of the monsoon. So we get an earlier shift of the pattern of where the high pressure sits, and we end up getting an earlier start in the monsoon, which doesn't always translate to wetter than normal monsoon, but it's possible. The rest of the Southwest is looking at kind of normal, equal chances. I mean, really, nobody has a clue what's going to happen this summer. We're hoping it's going to be wet, but we're not holding our breath. And so that's kind of where we are at this point in time. And I think that's everything. Oh, yeah. And so looking forward to next fall, and winter. They don't really have any clue about what's going on. The potential is it could be neutral. It might end up with a weak La Nina as a second one in a row, which is not uncommon. But there's not really any signal yet. It's a little too soon to tell. So we'll just have to wait and see. For us in Arizona, if we end up with a weak monsoon or weak La Nina, I would be happy with that, because some of the wettest La Ninas we ever have are with weak La Ninas, and sometimes they're really wet years for us, but I'm not holding my breath. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. I believe that's all I've got.
Excellent. Thank you, Nancy. If you have any questions for Nancy, please put them into the question box. And now we're going to move on to Danelle Peck. She'll be presenting on GrassCast, which hopefully is a tool that may help some of those ranchers out there make decisions given what Nancy just presented. Danelle?
Great, thank you, Emily. Just confirm that you guys can see my screen.
Looks good. We can see it.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Again, Danelle Peck with the Northern Plains Climate Hub, here to give you a first glimpse at the spring GrassCast outlook for the Southwest. And I first just want to acknowledge that GrassCast was developed by a very large team from USDA and several university partners, with support from USDA and the National Drought Mitigation Center. So my thanks to all of my teammates. So it's springtime, and we're looking out our windows, and we're waiting, and we're watching, and we're worrying about whether we're going to have enough grass out on our rangelands this year to support our livestock and our wildlife. And in the past, we've kind of had to rely on our precipitation outlooks. Nancy was just sharing some of those. But precipitation outlooks don't always translate exactly to rangelands, and we realized that maybe we could help with that translation step. And so that was why GrassCast was developed, to translate information about precipitation in the future and what we think might happen into something more directly useful for rangeland managers and ranchers. And so GrassCast was born, right? It's spring, we're waiting. Will we have enough grass? In the past, we've had to rely strictly on precipitation outlooks, but we've translated that into how much grass might grow out on our rangelands. GrassCast was born. Again, this is a map for the Great Plains from a past year. We're not going to focus on the Great Plains today, but please know that it will be available soon on our website. Today, we're going to focus on the Southwest. And so here is a glimpse of what the GrassCast map looks like for the Southwest. What is GrassCast? What is this map saying? It's telling us that based on the weather we've observed up to the date that this map was made, which was 2 days ago, and then trying to look into the future at some possible weather scenarios over the rest of the growing season, we expect grassland productivity in your area to be some percent higher or lower than your area's long-term average. And so I'll give you a concrete example here in just a minute, but that's a high-level overview of GrassCast. Now, I was showing you a single map, but in reality, we don't know how the growing season is going to unfold. We don't have a perfect forecast, and so we actually take a look at 3 possible precipitation scenarios for the Southwest. What if precipitation from today through the rest of the growing season is above normal? What would the GrassCast map look like then? What if it's near normal? And what if it's below normal? So 3 scenarios to give you a sense for a wide variety of things that might happen. And here's the 3-map GrassCast product. I know it's a little busy, it's maybe a little overwhelming. Nobody panic, I'll walk you through some concrete examples here in just a second. But before I do that, I do want to say something special about the Southwest that's different from the Great Plains where I typically work. In the Southwest, we're referring to Arizona and New Mexico in particular, there are actually 2 distinct growing seasons, spring and summer. And today I'm just going to be showing you GrassCast information for the spring growing season. And we define that as grasses that are growing in the months of April and May. So we're looking at peak grass production in the spring growing season as if you walked out on May 31st and took some clippings. And our forecasts are going to be based again on actual precipitation, which we've been tracking over the years, up to the date that the map was made, and then trying to look forward through the rest of April and May at what might happen to precipitation and evapotranspiration. Now, the summer grasscast forecast for the Southwest will be available starting June 1st. So keep an eye on our website when we get to that summer portion. So back to the spring outlook for the Southwest. Again, here are, you guys are getting the first glimpse of the first grasscast maps of the season. So let's see how we use them and what they tell us. The first thing is to choose a location that you're interested in. And today I've chosen Torrance County in New Mexico because its colors are really interesting. So choose your location, same location in all three maps, and then check out the colors. I'm going to start on the left, which is our above normal precipitation scenario. It's unlikely, but if we get lucky and it does kind of, the spigots turn on between now and the end of May, then this area in New Mexico is green, which tells us if that were to happen, we would expect this area to have near average amounts of grass, maybe 5% less than normal or 5% more, but pretty near normal. So if we get that miracle rain, we could hope maybe for some near average amounts of grass for this area of New Mexico. But as Nancy was showing earlier, the forecast for April and May is maybe not looking that positive. So let's check out our other map here in the middle. If we just get near normal amounts of precipitation, then this area is in yellow, and that suggests that we think that they should get 5 to 15% less pounds per acre than is normal for the spring growing season there. And sadly, if the spigot turns off and we have below normal precip between now and May 31st, then for this area's spring growing season, we're expecting 15 to 30% less pounds per acre than would be normal. Now that's a wide range, you know, these are big ranges, 5 to 15%, 15 to 30%. So you might be wondering kind of two things. One, can we get a more precise estimate? And two, do we know which one of these maps might be more likely? So to answer those two questions, first, I want to direct you to the GrassCast website, and there's a zoomable map feature there where you can go in and click on your local area and get a more precise estimate. So here it is. Here's a snapshot of the zoomable maps for the same area, Torrance County, New Mexico, and here are the more precise estimates. So, you know, 2% if you get lucky, maybe more like 10% less than normal, or again, if we get unlucky, maybe up to 18% less than normal. So you can go into the website and get more precise estimates there. And those estimates are updated every 2 weeks after we've observed additional weather data. Is that if you're looking at the GrassCast maps for Arizona and they're bright red, those are areas that this spring, that no matter how precipitation unfolds over the rest of the spring growing season, we are showing losses of at least 30% of your normal production or worse. And so again, for let's say Mojave, Arizona, Mojave County, Arizona, up in the northwest corner, when we look at our zoomable maps, we're talking about losses of 47% up to 72%. Again, if the spigots really turn off, we're forecasting 72% losses for quite a bit of Arizona. If you're red in all three areas, it's looking pretty dire. I will say that the summer forecast is quite, it's separate. It's a separate issue. It's not very well connected to what happens in the spring. So we're still holding out hope that maybe the summer season will be different. And again, keep your eye on that GrassCast forecast for it. For the sake of time, I did have a slide just kind of providing some resources. Be sure to go and check out the National Drought Mitigation Center's website for some good ranch-oriented drought resources. Reach out to your nearest USDA service center, our climate hubs, University Extension. There are some really great resources out there. Be thinking about programs that could help support you during these really terrible drought conditions, like the livestock forage program, the ELAP program with FSA, which can help with some of your water hauling costs, et cetera. So go talk to your USDA Service Center folks or the climate hubs and extension. Get connected to those resources that could help you through this really difficult growing season. With that, Joel, again, I apologize that you guys can't see my screen anymore. I'm gonna suggest people go visit the GrassCast website, grasscast.unl.edu, and check out the videos and tutorials there. Keep an eye out. We'll hopefully have the Great Plains map coming soon, which will serve eastern Wyoming and eastern Colorado and the rest of the northern and southern plains. And with that, I'll stop.
Great, brilliant, Danelle. Thanks for your time and thanks for sharing your expertise with us. I've got one question for Nancy, and maybe while I'm asking the question to Nancy, Danelle, could you put some of the links to some of the resources you mentioned into the chat box that people can snag if they're paying attention to that?
Absolutely.
And then I've got a few other questions for you, so I'll come back to you in a minute. But Nancy, one question is about the monsoon. You mentioned that there's the long-term outlook that's getting us into early summer. It looks like there may be a chance of an early monsoon. I know there's a lot of forecast uncertainty there. Does an early monsoon onset tell us anything about total rainfall through the season or the duration of the monsoon season? Like, does an early onset coincide with an early retreat?
No. No.
We wish, right?
Yeah, we've had early onsets and normal monsoons. We've had some early onsets and wet monsoons and some early onsets and dry monsoons. And it really doesn't give us any indication of actually how wet it's going to be.
Great.
It just kind of depends on it's kind of dependent on where does the high pressure set up. If the high pressure sets up over New Mexico or the Four Corners of those areas, we get that clockwise circulation that brings moist air up from Mexico, that unstable atmosphere and a lot of humidity, and that gives us a wetter than normal condition. That's what we really look for. But last year, that high pressure set up over California, and so we were looking at northerly flow, and air coming out of the north is dry air, and so that just basically suppressed the whole thing. And it was very persistent high pressure that sat over to the west of us, and so that was a problem. So it's kind of like, where does it sit? It's unusual to be where it was last year. So people, of course, asking me like, oh, are we going to see a repeat of last year? Well, we could, but the probability is real low for seeing a repeat of that because that's a very unusual situation. So hopefully we'll get back to more normal monsoon.
Yeah, I hope so too. We've crossed the half-hour mark. I'm going to keep going to address some of these questions. If you can stick around, please do. We won't take too much more time, but I want to get through some of these really good questions that have been asked. Here, the next one's for Nancy. It's about winds. Are the winds this spring average, or are they higher than average?
They've been higher than average. So we've been seeing some low pressure systems come through, and the juxtaposition of the high and low pressure makes a really strong gradient, and it's stronger than usual this year. And what's annoying is that those low pressure systems haven't come and produced any precipitation for us. All they've done is given us the winds, but it's definitely stronger than normal.
Great, thanks. That is kind of annoying that you're not getting any of the rain with the wind, but I guess that is what's happening, right?
Yes.
A few questions for you, Danelle. There's one question about how is pounds per acre determined?
Sure, Joel, thank you. So the pounds per acre is determined based on some really long-term clippings data sets that we have throughout the Great Plains and Southwest region. So we have some very long-running 30, 50-year clippings data sets, not for a ton of locations, but for some important representative locations. And so that's the first place where we look to kind of figure out the pounds per acre. But then to help us kind of fill in the geographic blanks in the map where we don't have long-term clippings, we're pairing that up with remotely sensed NDVI data, so kind of greenness data. So together, those historical data sets and the NDVI allow us to estimate pounds per acre across the entire region.
Okay, pretty smart. Thanks for that. What do the predictions mean for wildfire and grass predictions?
Yeah,
Wait,
interesting.
I read that wrong. Wildlife. It says wildlife and grass predictions, but I think I would, if you want to talk about wildfire too.
Well, I think for wildlife, I think it depends on what type of wildlife we're talking about. If they are ungulates, kind of, you know, that rely on grasses like our livestock do, then I think that the implications may be fairly similar. You know, so elk and deer who rely on grasses as a large part of their diet, you know, similar concerns. And we also know that these maps imply something about the amount of water available too. So water can actually sometimes be the more limiting factor, both for livestock and wildlife. But keep in mind that a lot of our ungulates do also eat a lot of forbs and shrubs. And GrassCast really is focused primarily on the grasses in a rangeland system. So it doesn't tell us a lot about how our shrubs in particular might do, and how the wildlife that depend more on the shrubs might do.
Great, thanks. And do you want to say anything about wildfire? I know I messed that up by asking the question wrong, but I think it's an interesting point. Can you use something like GrassCast to give you an indication of how dry the fuel is for a fire?
You know, we have one of our research partners with the Forest Service, Matt Reeves, has a product that was developed specifically for that wildfire, grassland wildfire question. And so if you're interested in the implications for wildfire, I would direct you towards what's called FuelCast, as in, you know, fuel for fire. So check out FuelCast from the Forest Service, which actually covers a broader geographic range than GrassCast too. Okay,
and I think that leads to the next and final question. Is there any plans to expand GrassCast into other Southwest states?
Yeah, we would love to. And there's a couple of things that have kept us from doing that, you know, quite yet. So one is, again, we do need some long-term grassland clippings data sets. And we've found it kind of challenging to identify those in some places like Utah and Nevada. So we are on the hunt for long-term rangeland clippings data sets. And if you happen to know about any, please reach out and let me know, because that is one of the critical pieces for being able to move GrassCast to a new area. The only other limitation I'll mention, Joel, is that in areas that are dominated by heavy shrubs or by trees, GrassCast currently is unable to go into areas like that. And that's because we do rely in part on that satellite derived information. And the satellites just have a hard time seeing in certainly forest cover, and then the shrubs kind of confuse it a little bit. So those caveats, but otherwise, we're hoping to be able to expand in the future.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm going to wrap up there. I would like to just take a bit of time to say thank you to Nancy, Danelle, also to Emily, who made us feel so welcome at the beginning of this webinar. Our next webinar is scheduled for Monday, the 24th of May at 11 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time. There will be an email with some more information about that coming maybe today or early next week, or maybe toward the end of next week, now that I think about it. But we hope that you join us again then. And with that, I'll wrap up. Thank you all very much and have a great weekend.